Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. I'm Yomesh Gupta. In this video, we are going to talk about top coding practices. These are the practices and tips that I have learned over my career. They might seem very simple to you, but you'll be surprised at how many people are, missing out on these. It would range from something very simple and intuitive to something a bit more complex. We'll keep a good mix. This is the part one. Multiple parts would be coming on this. Also, uh, PR reviews are very important, and these practices will make your PR reviews better because this will enhance the overall code standard and the practices adopted in your team. So without wasting any time, let's get started. So let's take a look at the first coding practice. I have an example here where we have a simple web page where we have a header and navbar, and these are the menu and some controls, and we have a list item, basically a list of questions, and like this is the main content and this is a sidebar where we have some other content. Very straightforward, very simple. Now let's take a look at the code for this. So we have this list page where it is a component that is returning a lot of JSX. We have a header here which maps to this header. We have a main tag which is basically rendering the list of questions. If we have the questions, then we are rendering the list, else we are rendering some empty state, and we have a aside which is basically rendering the study guides. If we have the study guides, we'll render it, else it would be empty. Okay, so this is fair enough. This is a very simple example, but you can relate it to anything in your code base that returns a lot of JSX, a lot of moving parts, lot of UI states, as in UI sections in your code base. So now one feedback that comes along is that can we make it simpler, can we make it more readable and modular? So what people like to do here is that they like to create methods called render header, something like render header, and that is going to return this header. So if I take this out from here and I'll just put it here, and we'll just use this render header here. So we have abstracted out into a function here. Similarly, we are going to do for other parts. Let's say I make a method called render content, or render content, render questions. That's up to you. We'll just take this part from here and we'll just return it right away. And we will just do render content here. Same goes for the sidebar. Let's say we'll take it out completely. We'll just cut it. We'll create a new method here called render sidebar, and we'll just return the JSX from here. And we will just do render sidebar. So if you look at it from the like bird's eye view, this seems like that we have modularized it. We are created methods that are returning JSX. So in our code there were a lot of you know conditional rendering, and also we can improve upon it here also. Like if we can say that if guides keys dot length, then we'll return null. Basically not. If we don't have the guides key, then we'll return null. Maybe we can just, rather than creating it at global level, we can move it here and we can remove this part. So this will make our code better. We can do the same for content. We can remove this question dot length, and we can do something like if we don't have questions dot length, then we'll return the empty state. So we will take this, and from here we'll just do this. That will remove everything from here. So this is fine. We have created methods and conditionally rendering them, and if someone comes in, they see that we have a render header. And in terms of UI, nothing changes. And if we go to our inspect element and if we go to our components, then let me zoom in more. We have just a list page, and that is rendering, that is getting the props and rendering all the sections. So this is one way to do it, but I'll show you something better, which I feel personally that it's a better way to do this. That when someone gives you a feedback that can we modularize it, can we make it better, then rather than creating uh, functions that return JSX, I'm not a very big fan of methods that return JSX. We should rather opt for creating functional components or function components that we call. So in case if we have a render header, we'll just take it out here. You can also, I would advise that we create another file called header. We create that in this. You can name it any, you can maybe name it list page header or whatever you want, and export it from there and import it in this file. And we can have the prop show controls here. So if we have show controls, then we'll render the controls. We can even go a step further and we can say controls, and we can just take this out and return from here. So if we have show controls, then we can say show controls, or sorry, controls, my bad. So in this case, this is the header, this is the controls. So for render content, what we can do is that we can create a component called content or maybe questions, that is going to take a prop questions, and inside this we'll just have the JSX that we defined here. So we'll just copy this part and we'll just return it. So we need questions. Anything else we need for this? No, we don't need it. So this is questions, and we have render content. We can create a component called sidebar. So idea I am creating in this file only just to keep the context, but you can create it in separate files and import it here. I'll show you that also. So we'll just take it out and we'll just put it here, and as a prop we would be getting guides. So now in our main component, what we can do is that we can remove all this list page, and in place of header, what we can call the invoke the component here, and we can pass show controls as show controls. In place of this, wait, did I miss something? I'll check. So in place of questions, we can pass the questions here, and in place of sidebar we can have the sidebar, and we can pass the guides here. So this is done. This is what am I missing here? Sidebar needs to have a closing element. We have main, okay, we have a closing header. Yeah, so this is fine now. So now if you will see that this is much more declarative and much more increases the readability, that if someone comes to this, let's say I export it out into different files and I'll just import it, and if we come to this page, list page, we'll just see that we have a header, we have in the main we have questions, and we have sidebar, and we are passing all the necessary props here. And if they want to check out individual sections, they can go inside that particular section and they can check it. Like if they are in questions, if we don't have the questions, we can also abstract this out. So rather than having a JSX returning here, we can create a common component called empty state, and inside that component we can just return this. So this can be used at multiple places. So we can just have a common empty state. So, and that we can use here. And then we have the JSX here for us. And it's much more readable now. And if another benefit of this is that when you go inside, let's say something is breaking in a particular method when you use render header, render control. So if something is breaking in questions, then it is hard to follow in depth to these React dev tools. But now, since you have individual components, you can particularly check which props is getting passed, what in controls, what is happening, question. So everything is mapped out in a better way. The your component structure is better, there is more readability, it is easier to reason with the structure, and when we export them out to a separate file and import them, then it is easier to read, it is more declarative. So this is one practice which I like to advocate for, that rather than having functions that return JSX, we should opt for function components. So the next coding practice I'm going to talk about is around state management, or multiple, use state or Boolean flags in a component. So let's say we have this list page component here, uh, and here we have questions, which is an empty array initially. Then we have is loading, is finished, and has error, which is false for now. And we have this button at the bottom which says fetch questions, that if we click on it, then this method is called, that sets is loading to true, and we fetch the questions. If it's a success, then we set the questions, we set is loading to false and set is finished to true, or if it's an error, then we'll set has error to true. Okay. And once we have that, we have some rendering here, that if uh, it's loading, then we'll show the loader. If there is an error, then we'll show the error. If it's finished and we have questions dot length, then we render the questions finally. So this seems like good, but in here we have to, track a lot of Boolean flags, and we have to manually remember them to set, that do we, I need to reset the loading, I need to reset the is finished, and so on. So my next coding practice around this would be to advocate around having a simplified state management in this case. Or rather than having different Boolean flags, what we can do here is that we can create a variable called state, and we can say set state, which is going to use a use state, and this is going to be idle for now. So what we are going for is that rather than having multiple Boolean flags, we are defining different states. That our state could be idle, it could be loading, or it could be finished, or it could be error. So we have these states. So inside our fetch questions, what we are going to do is we can comment out all these things for now, and we can have that we need to set the loading. So we'll say set state, and we'll set it to loading. And once we have the data, then we are going to set it to finished, and if there is an error, we are going to set the state to error. You can have a another state for if you have want to catch some error message and want to show that, but here I'm just talking about the Boolean flags. So we'll remove all this for now. So now, our state management is simplified, that we can either have loading, idle, loading, finished, or error. And here what we can do here is that we can say that if our state is equal to loading, then we need to show loader. If it is equal to error, then we need to show error. If it's finished and we have the data, then we'll show the questions here. you know in terms of the logic, in terms of the UI, nothing changes, but the state machine is set up here, and it is easier to follow. We know that our state can range out any, as in range from idle to error. There is nothing unexpected happening, like two Boolean flags getting true at one time, like is loading, is error, or something like that. So this is simplified. We can easily follow the state transition. We can, it is much more readable. Conditional rendering is better now, and we know what are the possible states for a component could be, so that when we are debugging and we, check, we don't have to compute, oh, is loading is true now, or is error is true now. We can check in the React developer tools also that the state is right now loading, or is it finished, or is it error. So it's much simpler to follow. So the idea here is that if you have multiple booleans and if you can combine them and simplify them, then that should be the way to go forward. So I see a lot of components when I review code, and be it from junior engineers, from senior engineers, where components and imports are defined like this, that there are bunch of imports happening, and we have a list page or whatever component it is, and it is using those. Now this is fine, this works well, there is nothing which is broken here, but we especially at Apollo also, we like to do it in a better way, which we feel personally it's better and it's more readable and manageable in the long run. So what we like to do is that, let's say, we like to categorize our imports into certain sections. So let's say initially we have uh, all the imports from npm package imports, then maybe all the components, let's uh, separate out those. We have questions, we have button, let's put this button here. Then let's say let's all the selectors, then some utils we can, or maybe let's push this selector at the top, then we'll have some utils, then illustrations or images or styles. So basically what I've done is that the jumbled chaos imports that we had, I have uh, just simply rearranged them. A quick note here, that if you have, or if you know any VS Code plugin or any CI/CD pipeline or commit way to rearrange this automatically, then please do mention in the comments, do reach out to me, or maybe you can create something like that. Coming back to this, so I've not done any change here major. What I've done is I've just rearranged the imports in a way that it is much more readable and much more manageable now. At the top we have all the npm package, then we have the components, then we have the selectors, utils, images, styles. You can extend this. Let's say you have some constants, you can create a section where you'll import constants. You can have for types or something like that, you can create, group them by their type. Basically the thing here is, so it's and it can become like a de facto standard in your coding, that if uh, I am done and I hand it over to another team, when they open this component, at the very first glance, they're able to identify quickly that these are the npm packages, these are the component, these are the selectors, and so on. They don't need to go through that jumble mess to figure out what is where, and they can follow the same practice, that if they want to import components, they'll just put it here. If they want to import selectors, they'll just import it here. So it's basically, the idea here is you're writing code for fellow developers, for fellow engineers. So if you leave the code in a better state than you found it, then that's a net positive, and that is what most companies and most teammates are looking out for. So the next coding practice is around our props. Let's say I have this code editor and a programming question component in DevTools platform. So in a programming question, we do a lot of things, and we render this code editor that takes code, which is the current code, on some on change callback, and some config or some props which can modify the behavior of the editor, like font size, read only, mini map, auto indent, used as, format on paste, and so on. And inside our code editor, I am simply just destructuring them and maybe using it somewhere, which is fine, which works fine here. Let's say tomorrow I want to add another config related prop, I'll just add new prop here. But at one point this becomes too much, like too many props, or too many similar props that we can group. So here what we can do is that, rather than having similar props as individual props, we can create something like here. We can create a prop called options, and we can move all this inside our options object, and we can just simply use it like this, like a key value pair here. We can say true, comma, we have this which is also true, this is false, this is true, true, and this is also true. Basically what we have done, that rather than having so many props, we have grouped these props inside a namespace called options, and we can just take these out and we can just have options here. Now if you're using TypeScript, you can define the type here, and the structure of this, and inside this you can destructure it if you want. If you want to directly pass it, that's up to you. You can assign all the uh, default values to these if you want. That's up to you, and make it optional. Now the benefit of this approach here is that we can, first of all, it is much easier to manage, that all your related prop goes under a namespace and we know what it stands for. You can even abstract it out, that take it out, let's say inside your constants file, constants dot ts or js, whatever you want to call it. You can create a variable called uh, editor options and define there, and you can just import it and pass to options, and you can reuse it at multiple places. So the idea here is that we have drastically cut down the number of props that we are passing to our code editor, so that it's much easier to manage and much easier to reason with. And here we can define all sorts of default values if we want. Let's say if user is not passing a certain prop, we can define the default value. And it is and plus, since we have taken out into a constant, then now we can use it anywhere. Individual, earlier we used to have individual props, so we have to pass individual values. Now we can just pass an object which we can define at a third place and reuse across our apps. So this improves our readability, this decreases the prop size, and it sets a good standard for the future development of this component. So the next one is a very simple one, which in my opinion makes the code base a little more readable. So let's say you have this question page, and where you want to have an use effect which is going to be invoked on mount, and you want to track, maybe make a analytic call. So usually what we do here is that we just create a use effect, and inside this use effect, let's say we have the track function, and inside track function we pass some value, as simple as that. So this works uh, fine. We know that if I come to this component, I'll see there is no dependency, so it is getting called on mount. But we can go a step further and make it more explicit and readable. So let's say rather than using an arrow function, I'll just simply use on mount, name the function on mount, and use this callback rather than an arrow function. So now what the idea here is that, let's say you have a big use effect, or you're doing a lot of things in use effect, you can break them down into smaller use effects and name the functions or the callbacks that you are passing to the use effect. So the benefit of that would be that if I come here, if someone later on comes to this component and they see this use effect, they can make sense that this is getting on this is on mount. So that means anything that should happen on the mount should go here. So they can either create a new use effect, or maybe they can add to this. Similarly, if you have a big use effect, you can just break it down and use it and name it. So something like, let's say you are fetching something on id. So if id changes, so you can create a method and call fetch question on id change. I'm just naming it. You can name anything, fetch question by id or something of that sort. So this is much more readable now, that what is happening, what is the purpose of this code block. And if someone later on comes and try to extend this, then they have a good sense, they can read your code and they can make out what is happening here. So this is the end of the video. I hope you were able to learn something new today. If you feel that I did something wrong or something could have been better, then please do share them with me, and do reach out to me in the comments or through social media platforms. If you follow some best practices or some tips and tricks that you want to share with me and the community, then please do mention them in the comments. Also, there are two links on the screen as always. topmate.io/Yomesh Gupta. If you want to book a session with me, want to talk about your career, my career, have a mentoring or guidance session, or just want to discuss anything, then book a session. If you want to practice, then you can go to devtools.tech/practice. It will give you one random question, and that is good enough to start with. Do like, share, and subscribe if you see value in our content. It means a lot. Till next time, see you. Take care. Bye bye.